Hi. In this lecture, we're going to talk about the way this class is conducted and begin to sort of explore how I want you to approach the subject of art. First of all, this class will probably be conducted in a manner that is unlike anything you've ever taken before, in part because the way I teach has been a personal project that I have developed over the years that I hope mimics what it's really like to be an art historian and give you an appreciation of what it means to sort of investigate evidence visually. And so to do this, a very important idea is this idea of visual analysis. And so we're going to try and understand how we can go about looking at things and sort of making sense of what we're seeing. In some ways, I'm going to ask you to look at things before you understand completely what they are. And so this is what I call putting the art before the course. Because just like an art historian, we're often looking at things and we don't really fully understand what we're looking at. And we have to sort of figure it out like a detective. So, to begin with, what can we learn about something by just looking at it? Before we fully understand what we're looking at, we have to be able to sort of analyze these pictures. Now, in many cases, we're looking at photographs of objects, or photographs of paintings, or photographs of woodblock prints. To describe these things sort of generically, I often say we're going to look at this image. But we're really not analyzing an image. We're analyzing, the object in the image. So, the object here is a statue. From the photograph, it's difficult to quite understand the scale of what we're looking at, but we do get a sense it's actually quite large. This is a stone statue that is about 6 feet tall or more. And so when we start to look at it more closely, we begin to identify some unique characteristics about this particular image. Now, if we look closely, we'll say, well, it's an elephant, right? We can see the trunk, very distinctive, the tusks, which seem to be broken. But it's not just an elephant, it's a person also. We can see it has the sort of hands and the characteristics, eye and body like a person. Okay, and we see certain qualities of this sort of elephant person. And this elephant's wearing clothing like a crown and jewels and other kinds of ornamental things like a person would. So we look at these things here. We see also that the eye is quite large. The head is large for the body. And then also if you look closely, just below the trunk, it has this sort of big outy belly button, sort of like a baby might have. Furthermore, if you look closely, you can look at what the hands, these human hands, are doing. In one hand, we can see it's holding is actually a tusk, portion of a tusk. Another, it's holding a bowl, and it looks like the trunk is hovering over the bowl, picking out some food. Okay, so these are all sort of visual clues we're going to start to use in picking this all together. The base of the statue is also very interesting. Notice there are these sort of skulls tucked into the base. Okay, and then on the uppermost part of the head, there's this very ornate decorative band of jeweled like a crown. Okay, so we also see in another hand on the back, there's a hand holding an axe, a symbol of a very stylized, ornate axe. So these are things we can observe just by looking at it. We don't know exactly what this is, but we can start to describe what we see. And these are sort of the tools. We try not to analyze the meaning. We try not to speculate too much beyond what we're just able to see. We can use this information to start to pull together some important clues that further research will help us reveal. So, in many cases, the most important information we need to ultimately find is specific to the work itself. Who is the artist that made it? What did they call this? When was it made? What is it made of? And where is this art today? All these things are talking about things that are specific to the art. In many cases today, art that is really old from far away and long ago, we will not know the name of the artist. We will not know if the work was given a particular title. It may not be written on the piece. So sometimes we just refer to it in a conventional way, calling it something according to its location and its conventional name. And we may not know its exact date, but we may have a kind of rough idea based on other evidence about when it might have been made. Okay? So, how can we get this key core original information? So if we start to think about it and what we've seen, we might say that this was, an elephant with a crown and an axe. And if you Google those very words, elephant, crown, axe, you'll suddenly see pictures of the god Ganesha. And you'll see that the god Ganesha has many of the very same features as our statue here. You go further and you start to look at statues of Ganesh. You might find this particular statue in a further search from Bara Temple in Tusikayo village, Blitar, East Java in Indonesia. And it was built in about 1239. Okay, so we do know a fair amount about this particular statue. It's a fairly famous statue. Many of the works we will be looking at are very famous. And they're very real, very specific things that we can learn about them. So now that we sort of identified this thing, we start to look at it, we want to start to understand the statue further and get to understand who is Ganesh and why is this Indian deity doing in Indonesia, several thousand miles away. So what kind of culturally relevant terms can we use to describe the art? How can we understand Ganesh and this statue and what kind of meanings did this actually have for the people of Indonesia? So we can start to make comparisons with different kinds of artworks. And we can start to look at how this particular example of Ganesh may be similar to and different from other examples in other cultures at different times, or even different statues that existed in Java. And so we start to look at how this deity has been represented and what does this deity represent generally, and how is that meaning different in this particular example. So by comparing, we see that the Java Ganesh has this more childlike quality, emphasizing this idea of youth and sort of new rebirth and a new creation. Very closely associated with this idea of death and destruction, that out of death and destruction comes life. And we see that sort of in the way that skulls are in the base, which is not a typical way in which this statue is represented. Furthermore, we can see how this statue not only was represented in India in the past and how it was represented in Java, and then how is it represented today. We can start to get an idea of how this deity may have evolved and changed over time, and how does those ideas represent this larger notion of Ganesh changing over time. So our second category is we're looking for things that were about the same time from the same period that served a similar function and maybe even in a similar style. Here's another example over on the right of a Ganesh from this period in Java, and it looks completely different. And that is why this particular period in Javanese history, there was lots of experimentation in different ideas about how to represent the deities. And so we can see that this is a time when these kinds of new ideas were emerging in Java. Okay, so we can start to compare with things that are sort of related, but also clearly different. Next, we get to a kind of larger category, a category that is really broad when we start to think about the idea of this character Ganesh, and that this image of the axe, or the idea of the bull, or why does he always have this broken tusk in his hand. All of these are sort of influential ideas, aesthetic ideas, symbolic themes, and visual patterns that might be centuries old and may have a continuity that's quite remarkable. It doesn't mean that the meaning has not changed in all that time. It just means that the outer shape of them has some continuity. So we have three different kinds of information we are looking for: the specific work, the sort of general related ideas, and then the very broad sort of aesthetic ideas. So in this example here, now I'm showing you the stupa at Sanchi from the 3rd century, Madhya Pradesh, India, which is stone architecture. And all of that sort of describes that particular picture. We can also say that it was built for a Buddhist stupa, and it was built during the Ashoka period. So it gives a kind of rough few hundred years, and in that time there were a number of these stupas built that we could compare it to. Furthermore, certain values and ideas that have transcended this particular time, the idea of something being aniconic, meaning showing the idea of Buddha without actually showing Buddha himself, or the mandala, this sort of mystical idea of a perfect universe that we can meditate upon, and how these ideas have influenced not just stupas, but other works of art as well. So we want to make sure that when we're describing these objects, that we have a kind of broad categories from each categories, information from each of these three categories, that we can draw this together and start to give a really full, rich picture of what we're talking about. So, ultimately, in our descriptions, we need to not just talk about the individual works of art, but we need to be able to make comparisons. Comparisons are a number of different kinds. You can make a comparison which is essentially the same thing. You can say, here's one example, the stupa at Sanchi, and that here's another part of that very same stupa. This is the gateway of that stupa we are looking at in our first picture. Okay, this is probably one of the simplest and most basic kinds of comparisons. We are looking at a detail of the original work. Another thing to do is to talk about something that was from the same time period, that's closely related to each other, in that this is a capital that is a sculpture that rests on top of a pillar, and that this was something that would have been found by the travelers to the stupa. It would have been in places like this stupa at this time, so it's a very closely related work of art. We can also talk about how things evolve over time, and this is a very important idea in art history, that we can say the art at the stupa of Sanchi, over time, this idea evolves into new works that are based on some of the ideas and new ideas as well. So we need to talk about how older art influences newer art. Okay? These are very important ways in which we can compare works over time. Another very interesting way to look at ideas in art is to talk about the ways in which one religion, the Buddhist religion, contrasts with the Hindu religion at the same time. Buddhist stupas and Hindu temples existed at the same time, but they had very different functions and very different symbolic ideas embedded in them. Okay, so these are contrasting ways that you can compare these two images. Lastly, we can take images and we can talk about ways in which they are diametrically opposed by other ideas that deliberately took those ideas and did the opposite thing because they rejected the ideas of the past. This is different from being influenced by them. This is because it's saying that we no longer want to do those things. And so this sort of opposition to the past creates a conflicting idea in art. Okay? This is a very important idea. It's one of the most complicated ideas to identify in art, but one that is very rewarding when you begin to really understand how these influences can manifest themselves in the art we're looking at. Okay, I've given you a lot of information here, and I'm doing this not to introduce these concepts to you, which I understand are wholly new. My point is to identify the way in which we talk about art and give you a sense of how you can start to think about ways of looking at art. Okay, this information will be covered elsewhere and later in a much fuller and deeper way, but I want to just lay out from the beginning that this is a strategy, a way of thinking visually, which is very different from any class you may have taken before. Now, let me talk to you a little bit about our assignments. To begin with, in a couple of weeks, we'll have our first assignment, which is the definitions assignment. For each of the 3 sections that we will have a definitions assignment. In the definitions assignment, there will be a list of about 20 to 30 terms, and you will choose any 5 of those terms, and you will define them in about 80 to 100 words. And you will give an example from this image collection. Now, the image collection will be available to you to review online. Each of the images in the collection is only identifiable by a random code. It's important that you find the correct image as an example of the term so that you can demonstrate that you understand how to use this term in talking about some of the images in our image collection. Okay? Now, the image collections are images that we will be reviewing in readings, or they will be related to things that you will see in the class lectures. Okay? So take the time to review the images and find ways to apply the terms to the images. A warning: some images are easy to identify, some are difficult to identify. Some terms are easy to define and some are difficult. Not all terms have easily identifiable examples. Don't believe just because it's a term on the list that there is a corresponding image. Okay? I put in words that don't have images because I want you to make sure that you understand the term. Okay? So, you're going to choose 5 terms and you're going to identify them. Our next assignment is the image identification. In the following week, after the definitions assignment, in each section we'll have an image identification where you will choose any one of the, well, it says folder, but the image collection. And in the image collection, you will find a picture that you can identify, as I mentioned earlier, the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary information to give a kind of full description of what you are looking at, so that it's clearly obvious that you understand one of the images. And then you will make a comparison to another image as a way of demonstrating that you understand how that one image relates to the other image. Okay, it's very important that you maintain your focus on a single image during the image identification. In the 5th week, we will have an exam. And this exam I will send out, and you'll have several days to answer each of these questions and return it to me in the turnitin.com. The exam is worth 100 points total. It will include definitions, an image ID, and essay questions. They will have 3 definitions. I will post 5 terms, and you will choose 3 of the 5. There will be 2 image IDs. I will post 4 images of my choosing, and you will identify 2 of the 4 images. And there will be 3 essay questions, and you will choose 2 of the 3 essay questions to answer. Another very important assignment that we will be working on over the course of this class is the Electronic Writing Portfolio Essay, or EWP Essay. Now, everyone is required to write this essay, even if you have already fulfilled your electronic writing portfolio requirement. But if you complete this essay, you may submit this to your electronic portfolio requirement. Okay, the first part of this assignment will be due on the February 24th, and this will be the proposal, where you will tell me what topic you've chosen and give me a selection of images that you've found as research to your topic. Then you will have the outline, where you will select the 10 images that you will be using for your paper and put them in order and that you intend to discuss them. And then finally, at the very end of the semester, we'll have the final paper due with 100 points. Okay, so that's sort of a quick overview of all our different assignments. Each one of these I will give you extensive information about further along in the class, and you can see it in the syllabus. All right, please contact me if you have any questions about any of these requirements. Lastly, in this class, I have some general advice. The image collection that we use is sort of the backbone of this whole class, and it's very important that you accurately include the image code from the image collection in your definitions and in your essays and exams. It's helpful to me if I can easily identify that code in your text, so I recommend you select it and bold-faced the image code so that it clearly stands out in the body of your text. Here's an example of someone using an image code. It's usually a 4-letter or number random code. And you'll see, looking closely at the bronze vessel RCEJ, you can see multiple beast masks or tauti in the design. So here the code RCEJ refers to an image in the image collection. And then I will immediately be able to see and recognize that you know what you're talking about. Okay? And that's how we demonstrate that you have learned the material. Okay? The other important piece of advice I have is it's very important to paraphrase your answers. A lot of people use quotations in a way that is not helpful. It encumbers your writing and it makes it difficult to read. It's a very important practice to put things in your own words. It really clearly shows you understand what you're talking about, and it gives you a chance to really think clearly about what you're trying to say. So generally avoid quotations and generally paraphrase completely your answers. I do not want to see any uncited quotations in your papers. Okay? All right. Best of luck to you. Let's get started with this class.